Without further ado, I would like to introduce our wonderful panel. Starting is Dr. Angela Wilson. She's a university distinguished professor in chemistry, and formerly she was also the director for the NSF division of chemistry. Next is Ashley Shade. She's a faculty member in microbiology and molecular genetics. In the middle is Jeffrey Nanzer, electrical and computer engineering. And seated next is Susan Wyche, media and information. She's a faculty member in media and information. And lastly, it's Yadu Pokhrel, who is a faculty member in civil and environmental engineering. Welcome to all of you, and welcome to those of you who are participating in this discussion via Zoom. So lastly, we'll be opening up for an initial question, and then we'll have follow-up questions. So I'm going to start with this question, which is pretty broad-based, and I hope you can share this, is will you please tell us about the research topics of your career proposals? What was novel or innovative about your research topic? So I would like to start the panel off with a discussion on that, and then we'll have some more follow-up questions. Thank you. Oh, by the way, my name is Shobha Ramanand. I forgot to introduce myself, and my cards are at the back. So if anybody wants that, they can pick that up. Thank you.
I'm not sure how to turn this on. Are they on already? Yes, okay, terrific. I'll go ahead and start. And actually, I mean, my area is quantum mechanics, and I don't think that the broad audience here is going to really appreciate me talking about what was in my quantum mechanical proposal many years ago, but I will just kind of give some general advice. And so I was head of the chemistry division at NSF for about 2.5 years. And I've talked to faculty all over the country and done lots of workshops on career proposals. And so I'm just going to give kind of a few broad ideas in terms of suggestions on proposals. Those of you who have written a lot of proposals already, you know these things already, many of them, but I can tell you the most important one is to start early, and that's absolutely critical because some people, and I've seen these proposals at NSF, some people decide they're going to go ahead and submit a proposal to NSF and just kind of get some reviewer feedback. No, no, no. Write your proposal, get feedback from your colleagues, a trusted colleague, and that's where you should get your feedback. You should not be getting, you want your first attempt to be a good, solid attempt, whatever proposal that you do submit, and that's absolutely critical. Contact the program in advance. So those of you who are planning to do the career proposals this year, right now NSF is still recovering from the long shutdown, and so I would give them a little bit more time, but certainly mid-March I would go ahead and send them email and ask them for a time to have a conversation with them, and definitely have a conversation before you submit a career proposal. I've seen many career proposals come in that look like NIH proposals. Those will get rejected without review, and unfortunately we've had many of the divisions at NSF have had to reject proposals because they look like they're really targeted to other agencies. And so it's important to make sure that your proposal is targeted to the agency. Do something that you did different than you've done previously. And it's important to have, one strategy I took is I wanted to have something that I could accomplish within a year to 2 years very easily, whether or not I had the most talented graduate students or not, something I knew I could get publications on. Then I also had kind of a mid-range project, and each of the projects had kind of sub-projects to them. And then I had long-range, something I could really build my career on. And I think that's really important. You don't want to just be kind of a one-trick pony and have just one main topic, and basically reviewers will call that out. Because if everything's linked to that one aspect, and that one aspect, if there's anyone who who questions whether or not it'll work, that'll sink the entire proposal. And so I'll stop there. I'll give you some more comments as we go through.
All right, great, thanks. So I just was awarded my career last year in 2018, and the question is about the topic of the grant and the novel aspects of it. So my grant came from the Division of Environmental Biology at the NSF, and it was co-funded by 2 sections, actually, the Ecosystem Sciences section and also the Population and Community Ecology section. And so this is something that I learned when I submitted my proposal, is even though you might have a target section, and I think it varies a lot depending on the division, but they assigned me a secondary one, which means I had twice the reviews and twice the fun. But I still got funded in the end. It was my second submission. The topic of my grant was Microbiome Resilience. It was specifically asking how rare and dormant members of the soil microbiome respond to stress. And so I think this topic was timely for my division. We're really interested in how the microbiome contributes to ecosystem services, and we're interested in how their functions are going to change under climate change. And all of these kind of topics relate to what my division and those sections put out as far as what they're interested in funding now. So I tried to align my topic. Of course, it's my interest. My heart was there, but I tried to align it really well by using some of the same key vocabulary and phrases from the solicitation. And something I think that helped my proposal as far as novelty is, even though I had this overarching theme and I had my 3 aims, each aim was complementary in its approach and the techniques that we were using to address the same question. And so I had one aim that was kind of observational study, a field study. I had one aim that was computational bioinformatics, and I had one aim that was experimental in the lab. And so my reviewers told me that they really liked that approach, that I wasn't just, doing fieldwork the whole time or just doing experiments the whole time in the lab. I was able to kind of layer these different tools and techniques, and they liked that would show off my skill set to launch my career. And that's all I'll say about that now.
Okay, so my research is in radar and wireless systems. So the topic of my proposal is on distributed wireless systems and coordinating distributed wireless systems. And so it's just kind of like taking drones and putting sensors on them and making them look like one large sensor. So if I can, kind of build a little bit on what some of the other panelists said. I did discuss this with the program manager beforehand once or twice, just meeting at conferences, just kind of told them what I was interested in doing. Whether or not that helped, I don't know. But I did kind of get a little bit of feedback on just kind of what the topics of interest were for, the directorate that I was proposing to, and kind of what they wanted to do in the future. And they'll tell you that sort of a broad sense, so they were interested in radar at the time. So, and this was last year when I got mine. I think one thing that I tried to focus on in mine was leveraging sort of new advancements to look at established theory in sort of a new way. So as opposed to kind of what Angela was saying, I did have kind of one major focus on mine, but it was a very fundamental focus. It was kind of looking at some fundamental theory in a very different way. And this allowed me to do a lot of unique sort of aspects. So I could propose I'm going to do a couple of things, but they're all tied to one fundamental underlying theme. So I think that helped. Oh, sorry. So I think that helped having like an underlying fundamental aspect to it that I was building off of, and that's allowed me to tie all the new sort of what I thought were innovative things back to established theory that I knew the reviewers would understand. And to me, I think that was important to show that I was building on established theory and taking it in a new direction rather than just coming up with something totally new. Kind of what's new, what's novel about what I proposed is using dynamics in the array. So actually things moving around. Typically in my field, we look at things as sort of stationary when we look at their electrical states. So I was looking at electrical states and spatial states as well, and trying to figure out not only how to understand the theory behind that, but also how we can design systems and control those dynamics in multiple dimensions to create new types of measurements. Without getting into a lot of technical detail, I guess I'll kind of leave it there.
So thank you. I'm Susan Wyche. I'm an associate professor in media and information, and I broadly work in an area called human-computer interaction. And my award came from the Computer Information Science and Engineering division at NSF. Many of the things I want to say are especially aligned with what Angela said. Start early. I mean, practically that for me meant having a complete draft by March, and then working with people in OIRC who reviewed the draft and completely dismantled it and put it together again to help me be successful. My topic was broadly looking at innovation. And again, this was something that NSF is incredibly interested in. There's this sense that America is falling behind and not no longer as innovative as it used to be. So my proposal was suggesting that we can look at other contexts, in particular Kenya, as sources for innovation that can sort of inspire new innovative technologies in the United States. What's unique about my proposal is that it funds research in Kenya, which is unusual within this particular directorate. And again, like Angela said, I had to make a case for why the National Science Foundation, rather than USAID or NIH, would want to fund research in Kenya. So if any of you are thinking about doing international work, I'd be happy to talk to you about how to do that. You know, I would be happy to share and let you read my proposal. I think that's actually the best piece of advice, is to read as many proposals as you can. And even though we're all coming from very different disciplines, there's some things that are pretty standard about the Career Award, making sure you have a really strong, you really work to the research and education component together. That's something that's unique about this award. And again, even though we're all coming from different disciplines, I suspect that we all had very strong, that must have been a strength of our proposals, because that's something that's really critical to NSF. So read proposals, I'd be happy to send you mine. I've also sat on review panels for the Career Award, and it might be more useful to share that experience rather than me putting together my proposal.
Okay, I work in the area of hydrology and water resource modeling, and my career proposal was funded under the Hydrologic Sciences program at NSF, which is under Geosciences Directorate. And the topic of my proposal was interactions between natural system in hydrology, water resource, climate change, and so on, and the societal component, interaction between natural and human component. Like human is how humans are using water resources and how are those interacting with natural system. So, and looking at the impacts of these changes because of these two drivers, natural system changing and then human system changing over time, and how are those impacting a range of social, ecological, and environmental systems. And I was particularly focusing on the problem at the nexus of food, water, energy systems, because when we have some change in water resources, that's going to impact food production, and there are feedbacks onto natural system. When we modify the hydrology for food production, that would impact the natural system, and climate change is compounding those effects. So that was the core area. And there was a NSF call on innovations at the nexus of food, water, energy systems. I think it's still there, and they had 4 or 5 calls over the last few years. So I was trying to tackle a broader problem, but by focusing on what I know and what I can do. And the novelty of my work was a lot of people do natural system in hydrology. They say, okay, climate change is going to impact water resources, future projections and so on. Some people study the human side. So I was bringing these two together and developing a novel tool that can be used to address these problems. And it's a big problem, but I particularly focused on what I knew and what tools I had. So I was building on the models that I had developed over the last 6-7 years and putting all these pieces together to tackle a bigger problem. That was what I was doing. And I showed my strength. I said, this is what I have done. This is what I can do. And I was also pretty ambitious in telling that this is my career goal. But I said, I built on what I had done already, and my project is pretty ambitious if you look at it overall, but it's also highly focused on something within that broader framework. So I'm going to accomplish this within my career project in 5 years, and then I'm going to use this foundational framework for my lifetime teaching and research. So, and I submitted that in 2016, they said, this is too ambitious. You are trying to solve all the problems that are there. And in the next cycle, I said, it's a kind of ambitious, but I'm clearly focusing on particular aspects of the bigger problem. So yeah, that was my proposal, and I also agree that the best suggestion is start early and get it reviewed by your colleagues or send it to the Vice President's office, whoever is helping you. So I think that's a very good suggestion.
If I may, I'd like to tie all this together because my career was 15 years ago, and I can tell you that one of the things I had done in terms of building mine was that I had looked at recent NSF calls and dear colleague letters. What was NSF focusing on at the time? And I made sure that my career proposal focused on that. in hearing what all 4 of these folks have done, and they've gotten theirs in this decade, all 4 of what they have pursued ties in to NSF's 10 big ideas. And so I suggest, and NSF is pushing that every which way, and not every proposal ties to NSF's 10 big ideas, but when it does, it really resonates with the different divisions. And so take a look, and if yours doesn't fit in that, don't worry. NSF still funds other things as well, but things like nexus of food, energy, and water, that's not something that still is, one of NSF's 10 big ideas, but it is still very important, even though they don't have direct calls, at least not all divisions on that now. Things like sustainability continues to resonate at NSF. And so definitely take a look at the Dear Colleague letters. What are they looking for? And if there's a way to tie in, it's a benefit to you to tie in with those. Most of the divisions have done recent workshops. Look at the workshop reports. They're on their website, and they talk about different things. If you're kind of like, I'm not sure exactly where to go with this idea, take a look at the recent workshop reports and see what questions maybe some of your research might help address, because that will be of great interest to NSF.
Thank you. How did you develop the education and broader impacts components of your proposal?
There was a question right here. Just
a quick clarification. Sorry if I'm a newbie in colleague letters, and that's not something I've ever heard of before. Can you just tell us what that means?
Sure. So NSF has the regular calls. Every division allows just kind of general proposals, career proposals as well. And then there's also Dear Colleague letters that come up from time to time. Most of the divisions do have Dear Colleague letters. If you go to the division websites, they will have a posting of Dear Colleague letters. And these are short-term opportunities for, like in chemistry, we were looking for data science, data discovery. So there's lots of different ones that are out there. And so these are things to look for. Sometimes they're shorter proposals. Sometimes they're like 5-page proposals, and sometimes they're bigger money proposals sometimes. And so definitely take a look at those. And those really reflect kind of some current interest areas of NSF. So there's some additional nice opportunities kind of buried there.
You can subscribe for your colleagues. So you get every day. One of the things is that the Dear Colleague letters can be subscribed. Very easy to subscribe to the NSF letters, so keep getting them with your emails.
Right, and definitely look also, just because you're a computer scientist doesn't mean you can only apply to computer science. Look at engineering, look at chemistry, look in all different areas, because in the chemistry division, we funded people who were engineers, we funded physicists, we funded people in material science. I'm funded partly by computer science directorate, and so there's a lot of overlap, so. I'll start, but they're much more current. In terms of the education component, so the question is, how did you go about developing your broader impact, the education component? For me, my area is computational theoretical chemistry. So you want to, as somebody had mentioned earlier, you want to make sure that your research really ties into the education component. And so for me, I looked around, and one thing I discovered was that there was a lot of interest in computational chemistry, but there were a lot of people that were at companies and really could not get to a computational chemistry class. And so I offered the first 100% online computational chemistry course in the country. I also did a lot of other things as well. So again, just like with the research component, I had kind of a multi-tiered component to the education piece. And I also tied it with kind of, doing some literature search in terms of education, making sure I had some good solid references. And also one thing I want to tell you, I don't know if this is true in all directorates at NSF. It is true in many NSF directorates. This should not be just curriculum development. We presume that is something that you should be doing anyways as a new professor. And so at least in the chemistry division, that will not fly. And so you've got to have something outside of that. And that's really critical.
Great. So I Actually, the educational plan of my career proposal was the part that I was least concerned about, because when I got to Michigan State, I started leading a bioinformatics workshop for international and domestic graduate and postdocs. And so that became the leverage that I used to develop my educational plan. And a strength that we had in executing this workshop and having that experience so far was that we did some really rigorous assessments. And so because we had an educational evaluator, we were able to show that not only can we develop the curriculum or develop the workshop, which was hands-on tutorials in bioinformatics for microbial metagenome analysis, not only could we do that and execute it, but we'd already done it for 3 years and we have assessed it. And so we can see its strengths and weaknesses and work on the educational plan to develop those weaknesses further, and also to transfer the materials that we already developed to other learning communities. And so that was a big part of my educational plan. And it also very well aligned with my research plan, because we proposed to use the data that we had been generating and we're going to generate as part of the grant as our kind of hands-on data sets for the tutorials that we were developing. And so it aligned really well. And I always got, so I submitted my career proposal 2 times. And the first time I had basically, we have no comments on your educational plan because we love it, which, you know, they had other things to say about other parts of the proposal, but that one was a hole-in-one, so to speak. I think that in my division, again, which is the Division of Environmental Biology, they really care about assessment. They want to know how you know you were successful in your outreach and education plan, whatever that may be. And so sometimes, and the other thing that they want to know, and this goes along with the evaluation plan, is that if you don't put any budget towards those activities, it becomes suspicious, because it's like, well, you say you're going to make this wonderful course or do this wonderful outreach event, but you have no money in your budget dedicated to the resources or infrastructure needed to execute that. And so part of the budget that I put in my proposal was for an external evaluator of our educational materials. And so I think that showed that I was serious about it. Not only had we done it in the past, but we have money dedicated to pay for it in the future and to keep iteratively improving the materials.
If I may interject, I think that's an important question. You should ask your division when you have the conversation with, the program officer, to ask if an education evaluator is something that they would be interested in having you include on your proposal. And if so, do they have like a recommended max budget for that? Because some divisions are like, oh yeah, that's fine if it's 20,000. Some divisions like chemistry are like, don't you dare put $20,000 in the budget for that. We question if it's more than 1,000 or 2,000. And so there's other ways to do assessment as well. And so that's an important question to ask your program officer.
Okay, so for mine, which was in Division of Engineering, I focused probably more on the technical part than on the educational and broader impacts. But I did have what I think was a pretty, even though it wasn't, as much as the technical part, I thought it was a pretty strong part, because I focused on 2 things that are kind of important to me in the field. One of which is building on fundamental theory in my field. So I talked a lot about how what I'm doing is new, and this kind of goes with my prior comment about how what I'm doing is new, but how in teaching a new theory that I develop, I will still be teaching the fundamental basics that are applicable across electromagnetics and antenna theory in general. So it allowed me to say, although I'm doing something with a brand new perspective, it still kind of covers the educational stuff that we would want to cover in the field anyway. So I did focus kind of specifically on that, and how what I proposed to develop would tie in with established theory. The second thing I focused on, more for broader impacts, was how developments that would come out of my research would help local community, particularly in Michigan. I talked a lot about, for instance, automotive radar, and so how something that I'm doing could apply to an industry that's very important to Michigan, and how people who are going through educational process at MSU, or in my classes, or the technology that comes out what I'm doing, how it's applicable to the local community and helping increase the economy and what have you. Which is it's a little bit of a stretch from when we're doing very advanced technology to kind of say how it directly applies, but I thought that was important to at least discuss how that could turn into things that would help the local community. So I focused on those two things for my educational and broader impact.
So for my educational and broader impact, I'll talk more about the educational component. I had always heard what Angela said. It has to be more than just developing a course. I mean, first of all, that's something you should already be doing. And you're also evaluated on how creative your idea is, and just pitching a new course isn't especially creative. So I pitched a new course, but it was in teaching the course at a university in Kenya, which led into these broader impacts of cross-cultural collaboration, which is one of the broader impacts at the NSF. And again, something that hasn't come through yet is that my proposal is really about building on the strengths of Michigan State. I mean, recognizing that Michigan State has a long history in Africa, a long history of partnerships with African institutions. And I think that's something I use to help me think through how to develop my educational plan. And then also the computer science division has forever been interested in diversifying perspectives in computing beyond, the mostly white guys who are in it. So part of my proposal was funding students from the African continent to do this research. So, and that again feeds into the broader impact things at the NSF, and again builds on the strengths of Michigan State University.
Real quick, one thing I just emphasize that I did also part of the broader impacts, I think, or I had a section about half a page on institutional context, discussing the history of my field in particular at Michigan State, who else is there, who I would interact with, and whether or not that helped or not, I don't know, but I thought it made a lot of sense to put that in there and discuss, MSU's specific history in that. So I have that as well.
Actually, it's very important because, not everyone knows about MSU other than, other things that are in the news these days. And so it really is important to put the context in there in terms of why MSU is a great place. We all know it's a great place, but why it's a great place to do your particular project. And that's really important to put in there.
Okay, my educational component had 3 subcomponents. One was classroom teaching, enhancing classroom teaching by using the tools that I were developing under the project. The second one was, high school students, increasing awareness among high school students. And the third one was using the same tool to educate community college educators and then helping them in curriculum development. But the central piece was, as I said earlier, I was developing this integrated, highly sophisticated modeling system. What I said is I'm going to build something called educational hydrology model that can be taken to classroom, can be taken to outreach during engineering summer institute. And then I said I'm going to collaborate with the Midwest Institute that is a consortium of, I think, more than 10 community colleges in the Midwest. So I work with a collaborator at Kalamazoo Valley Community College, and also that would help me streamline some of the students, minority, underrepresented students there to come for a 4-year education. And I propose to generate some sort of funding mechanism for those. So those are 3 components. And how that happened is I came to MSU 2014, and 2015 I was planning to submit a career proposal. I had the research component because I was already doing other proposals. And then I think Angela said by March the proposal should be ready, but I started thinking about my educational component end of March. I went to talk to Soba at that point, and she gave me a bunch of proposals just to read at her office. I couldn't take them out from there, but I was able to see what other people were doing. And I found that many of the proposals had 3 pages, 4 pages of educational component out of 15 pages. And my stuff was, I had a half a page broader impact. Okay, use this in classroom, hydrology class or something like that. And I felt like, okay, I'm not ready. I'm not going to do this proposal this year. So I didn't do it. And next year I started early and started talking to people on campus. I went to engineering outreach director, and he said, we already have hundreds of kids during summer here, and we want to do something related to water resources to increase awareness among these students. So I said, okay, what can I do? I talked to him. So I utilized what they already had in place here. So I said, I'm going to build a new system that can be used to enhance this outreach component. And I was not putting these as a disparate components. It was kind of tightly integrated thing, but I was saying, are we going to do a high school activity and then community college and classroom by using the same tool? And in the second year, I talked to him, and then I talked to my collaborator at Kalamazoo Valley Community College. And that was also in our area. Typically, people do a high school or community college, something like that, but I didn't have any clue. I started talking to Asian Studies Center And the director connected me to somebody at community college. So I'm saying maybe you look for resources on campus and somebody could be able to tell you who is interested in that kind of stuff. And at the community college thing, what we did is we would develop something called moving exhibit, a traveling exhibit. In that we have video systems and computer model generated output and the screens, advanced visualization website, and so on. And they already had money to move that thing across the Midwest at different community colleges across Midwest. They were looking for the content. He said, can you develop this? And I said, yes, that's what I'm looking for. If you're already doing that, I'm going to develop the content. We'll collaborate with you guys. I'm going to help the curriculum development for you guys also. That is how this happened. So I had a lot of stuff going on for that first year. That year it was not funded, but I was funded in 2017. Anyway, that was how I worked on my educational piece.
Actually, if I may follow up really quickly on that, if you're not sure what you should do, we've got some really unique things here at MSU, and I encourage you to look around. One of them is the fact that we've got 4-H. MSU runs the 4-H program for the state, and so our extension does. And so right there, lots of kids if you're looking for activities. And I know extension. I've talked to the director of extension. They're interested in really kind of having folks plug into that. Another thing is we can make use of Detroit. I mean, NSF really wants to increase, they've got the Includes program. They're very interested in really trying to, expand the numbers of folks that are from underrepresented groups in the sciences. And Detroit is one of the poorest socioeconomic areas in our whole country. And there's lots of opportunities there to try to engage with Detroit. And so, think about these unique features of our area, of our region, as you put together your proposal.
Together.
All right, we were going to open the floor up to questions from the audience, and we will walk around the room with a microphone so that those who are tuning in via Zoom can hear the questions as well. And we actually have our first question on Zoom right now.
How did you target and select the NSF program if your proposed work fits multiple programs? Have any of you changed or considered to change a program?
So, I wouldn't spend a lot of time trying to figure out, okay, where exactly does it fit? I pick a program officer where it sounds like, I look at the website and say, okay, I think it might fit here, and you have a conversation with the program officer. The program officer will tell you if they're not the right person, and they'll help direct you to the right person. Lots of our research areas are interdisciplinary. So a program officer might tell you, go ahead and submit to my program. And if it's very interdisciplinary, like mine's between chemistry and physics and computer science, they talk to people in the other directorates and also get review, as has been mentioned earlier. And so they will take care of that aspect. But I'd have that initial conversation and they'll help you figure out where it sits.
I would just add, I would look at, we all have, look at other people who graduated from your field and where the directorate they applied to. That's something I did. People who are working in the same research areas I work in.
For me, I was actually already submitting proposals to 2 programs at NSF. Hydrologic sciences and engineering sustainability. And when I started building my career proposal, I thought I would go for engineering sustainability because they fund a larger number of career proposals than the hydrologic sciences does. But I wrote a 1-pager and sent it over to the program manager, Bruce Hamilton. He said, "Oh, looks like this is a very good match for hydrologic science, and it's not really good for my program." So at that point, I suddenly decided to change. It was, I think, a month before I was submitting the proposal, and then I contacted hydrologic sciences program director. He said, "Oh, look, this looks good." So I submitted to hydrologic science. So I think it's also a good idea to contact the program officer. What the program officer said is, you seem to be focusing so much on modeling. My program is about sustainability, purely sustainability. So you may have a better chance if you go to another program. So.
how much intersection and overlap, say you're going to submit a regular proposal to your program and also a career proposal, how much intersection and overlap would be really too much? Should you have an absolute clear distinction between the two and kind of no intersections, or is it okay if kind of they might fit together a little bit?
It's okay if they fit together. It's not okay if there's any overlap at all. And so, you know, it's a real fine line. And so, you know, and it's in the eyes of the program officer. And so I would have a real, because, you know, we can see all at NSF. And so even if you might have submitted to another division or directorate, we can still see what you've submitted. And so they will do a check on that. And so I would have a very clear conversation with them in terms of, do you think, and ask them, do you think this is going to be too much of an overlap? And let them guide you before you put the work into it. And then they're like, okay, which one? Or if they turn down both. So, yeah.
I think if you're early career, you do have the option of submitting very similar proposals. You just can't be funded for both of them, right?
Yes,
So
but
you
I
can-
don't recommend it at all. Because it's going to be the same program officer handling it, and NSF does not like to see that. And so, you know, if you don't really have a well-developed education plan, then go with a regular proposal. But if you have a really good education plan, then go with that, because your odds are higher with the career. Okay.
The follow-up question to that is that what if you submit a regular proposal 1 year and it's not funded, and you develop an education component and submit it as a career grant the next year? So it's probably the same program officer handling it. Do you think it's any like benefit or no benefit that they have seen it as a regular proposal before?
If you've done, I mean, I don't think there's a benefit either way, but you know, but my suggestion is because even with the career proposals, there are some people that get them first time, but more people get them on the second round. And so if the proposal has been reviewed previously, make sure you address the comments of the reviewers. And what I always do is I always do a preamble, because none of the reviewers typically know that the proposal has been submitted before. And so I draw their attention to it. I mean, it's up to you about the strategy, but I always have a preamble at the start of a proposal. I have one paragraph that just says, this proposal has been submitted previously, and these were the 3 main concerns. I keep it very short, and these have all been addressed. And so I let the reviewers remind the program officer, but the program officer, you know, odds are they know. But I let the reviewers know this has been reviewed, and I have, you know, it reviewed well, and I've addressed these questions. And so I think that's kind of helpful.
Yeah, and I asked a program officer about this, and he suggested something similar. He said, if you want to put a paragraph, it's okay, it's up to you if you can afford to do that, and if you have space, because you are, you know, you have 15 pages and you want to put your science and educational component. He said, if you want, you can do it. I did that in one time, yeah.
I've done that for most of my proposals, and I've had about 20 million in funding, so I recommend it. So.
We have another question from Zoom. Can you have a collaborator on the grant who helps develop and assess learning outcomes of the outreach component?
Yes, you can. But again, I would, you know, suggest contacting the program officer just to make sure that it is okay with their division, and find out kind of basically the price range that is kind of typical for asking that sort of thing for that particular division. That's very important.
So for my division, we weren't permitted to have any collaborators listed formally, but for my educational evaluation, I hired a consultant for that. So she wasn't considered to be a collaborator. It was just a consultant.
Right, no collaborators.
Then recognizing the career award is unique is that there's a sole PI. I mean, they're not, it's the only example of that at NSF. Right?
No.
Okay. But it's not the norm. Yes. It's atypical to have a sole PI award.
Right.
Another Zoom question. If I have 2 ideas for career proposal, one with great research aspect, the other with unique, novel educational aspect, which one should I choose?
I would do my best to combine them and try to do that, because I mean, They're both important, but number one with NSF is it is the science foundation. And so, important science is very critical. But for the career, the very strong education component is also very important. And so no career proposals are going to get funded without a really strong broader impacts, education component. And, but absolutely no proposal will ever be supported NSF without a very strong, without a strong science component. So.
Yeah, I echo the same thing. I think if the science component is not strong, I don't think it's going to be funded by NSF. That is my feeling. And of course, we have to put, equal emphasis on educational component. But if overall, I think science component has to be strong, and there has to be some novelty in doing the science, I believe. So.
Maybe this is a question for Yadu, actually. So for your educational component, you said you developed a course and you maybe taught high school students and had some community college. So what kind of funding you asked for this part of the proposal? Because teaching a course probably don't need anything, or yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. I asked funding for undergraduate hourly students who are going to be involved in the development of this system. There are graduate students who work on development of the model, but when we take that and develop that educational system, then I have hourly students throughout the 5-year period. So they are heavily engaged. And the other funding I had was probably on evaluation. That was small amount, maybe over a 5-year period, and I think $20,000 or something like that, or less. I don't remember the number. That was only for evaluation. Otherwise, I was engaging undergraduate students. And also I said, we're gonna have a mechanism to get some community college students come to MSU, and then they would be involved in the project as well.
So I've seen hundreds of career proposals, and I've seen the budgets because I had to approve all the budgets on all the proposals. And I can tell you that there were some people who did ask for money for the broader impacts, career education piece, and some that did not. And so, it's really what works for your project, what's needed for your project. So, but also talk to the program officer because, as was mentioned, there's some divisions that expect you're going to have money towards it. Otherwise, they don't think you're serious about it. But in chemistry, we're like, whatever resources you need to do whatever you're proposing, it may not be anything. It may be $10,000. It needs to be in there. So.
Yeah, and when I submitted in the first year, I didn't have budget for evaluation probably, and they commented on that. They said there's no, they said it doesn't look like there's enough budget for educational fees. That's why I included something in there. Yeah.
Did any of the panelists already have an NSF grant prior to their career grant? And is there any advantages or disadvantages to having prior NSF funding?
I did. But for me, it was a pretty small grant. And, the disadvantage is the fact that I had to have a prior research section. And so I had to take space to do that. But actually, the advantage was that some of what was funded previously was basically kind of what I built at least part of the proposal on. So that was helpful.
I had one prior one that I got the year before, and it was sufficiently unrelated that I usually have to have the section on what the prior research was, I think, at the end of the proposal, but it was separate enough that I didn't feel like there was any conflict or anything. That was my only concern, is kind of to that last question, is if you submit the career proposal and it's too similar to something you're already funded on. So I didn't have that issue with mine, but yeah, I got one within a year of the career.
Yeah, mine was ending, so I was able to just kind of use that as kind of the next step. So.
And I had one as a co-PI, but that was a different proposal, a big proposal, I think $3 million project, and I was a co-PI on that, so it was fairly different thing. And this is a good question. I was also told that if somebody told me, if you want to get funded through hydrologic sciences, you need to have a project funded by that program as a PI, otherwise there is no chance for career. But I got funded through the same program, so it doesn't seem like you need to have a project or a project from the same program or anything.
For most of the career awards, most people, it's kind of their first NSF award. Not for all, but for most.
And how does NSF look at having prior NIH funding? Is that a factor, saying, oh, they have already hands on big money, so?
Oh, that doesn't matter at all. I mean, NSF looks at it as separate as long as the project is not looking like an NIH project. Yes.
Somewhat similar question in the vein of thinking about timing and kind of what prior experience is helpful. Of course, I know the most important factor is going to be is your research, is your plan ready, right? But I guess I'm thinking about other things we might consider if I'm deciding like apply this year versus wait a year. If you have, especially those of you who have reviewed a lot of NSF, a lot of career proposals already, are you finding that most winners have at least some vague number of publications under their belt, or other things that may be going on in our career that are going to, or a number of classes under our belt already? So those kinds of things that might help deciding like when the right time to apply is.
So it really doesn't have to do with any, I mean, I've seen people get it their last year before they get tenure. I've seen people get it after their first year. And so it really, and it doesn't matter how many classes you have under your belt and all of that. One of the things that's important is when you submit your biographical sketch, you need to list 10 products. And so whatever 10 products are important in your field, make sure you do have 10 and not 5 or 6, because reviewers will point that out if you have like 5 or 6. And so, you could even put, I mean, in my area, you've got to have 10 publications, or it's just gonna, there's no point in applying until you have 10 publications. And these can be publications from when you're a graduate student, undergraduate student, postdoc, whatever, but you really need to fill that up with 10. But it's very much field dependent, and so, but just have 10 meaningful, items that you can list. It may have 0 citations if it's a paper, as long as you've got something that you can put in there. Absolutely critical. And what can help gauge whether or not you're ready is if you put something together and have somebody, put it together early, have somebody look at it, and that'll help you gauge too if it's ready for prime time. Because you don't want to submit something that, that's going to be kind of, get horrible ratings. Sometimes that happens, but, you don't want to kind of intentionally kind of submit something and just say, I'm going to see what the reviewers say about this. Mm-hmm. See what somebody in your field, first of all, thinks about it before you kind of embark.
So let's imagine a scenario where you've gotten reviews and everything is looking really good. Everyone says this is in great shape, but if you're only at 8 publications, your advice probably is wait.
So yeah, in chemistry, my advice would be to wait. Okay. But, in some fields, if you can list something like you co-authored a book chapter, if you gave this, a presentation, I mean, you can try to fill it up those ways. Okay. It just very much field dependent. So.
And I would just say apply when you're ready. I mean, it seemed too overwhelming to apply my first year here. And I think, getting grounded, coming back to learning about what the strengths are at Michigan State and how that can sort of mesh with what you're doing. I think I needed a year at least to figure that out.
And another thing I want to point out is that there are some divisions at NSF, like chemistry division has actually got a workshop for potential, for junior faculty who are going to be applying for the career award. And so a number of divisions have this. And so I recommend looking and seeing if your division has this, because it's a great experience. Like for the chemistry division, all the program officers show up. And so it's an opportunity for the 100 faculty that are selected to attend this every year to interact with all the different program officers and really get a lot of firsthand advice from the program officers, and also meet them, which I think is often very important.
So I just wanted to note that I had in my division, it was valued to have a lot of preliminary data, because I think that I probably wouldn't have been competitive for a career award, even with the same ideas taken in my first or second year, because my program officers wanted to see that I was spending my startup wisely to generate preliminary data to set me on a research track that I was then going to fund for 5 years with a career, because it's a career proposal. It's not just like this is what I'm going to do for 3 years. It's like, here, I'm establishing myself in this field as a leader. And so my first year that I submitted it, I had a lot of preliminary data, almost the same that I had in the second time, but I didn't have the pubs from that preliminary data. In the second year, I published some of those preliminary data. I had the follow through, and then instead of putting all the preliminary data in the grant, I just cited all my publications. And that went over really well. I had a lot of really great feedback from reviewers about, we appreciate the extent of the preliminary data. The PI has shown us that she can do what she says she's going to do. I think, again, that varies a lot by field, but in the division of environmental biology, that's what was valued.
And, you know, I would definitely leave yourself the window that if you can, so you've got 3 shots at it. You know, I think that's really important to have that opportunity, because, you know, even though I said the majority of people get it their second year, there are some that get it first year, there are some that get it their third chance. And so, you know, and honestly, it's very nice to have a 5-year grant as opposed to a 3-year grant. Very nice to have that opportunity, you know, so I encourage you to think about that as well.
Just to follow up on the products question. So let's say I've done some research in my field. It's very common that after you submit to a journal or a conference, while it's being reviewed, you put it up on archive. Is that something that can be listed as part of products to show that I'm actually working on this right now? And
oh, definitely. Yeah, I think that's important.
Or does it have to be a peer-reviewed, published?
You know,
product?
I would make your 10 products however you can make your 10 products.
Okay.
And in areas like physics, archives are just very, very natural. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. Things on GitHub in computer science and other areas, you know, also important. So.
You already mentioned this a little bit, but if you have any more to say, one question on Zoom is, how much preliminary results is required for a career proposal, or is it not necessary?
You know, on that, I think it's always important, because every career proposal that's funded has got some unique dimensions to it. And so the question is, will the reviewers believe what's proposed? And I would say most of the time, I mean, we're scientists. I mean, most of the time, we've got to have a little bit of proof. And so, you know, typically, I mean, not in everything, but typically most of us would like to see, or at least be convinced some way, and it's often through preliminary data, that indeed this is something that is doable. Because I see not even on, I mean, not just on career proposals, but I see on, you know, I've seen probably about 5,000 proposals while I was at NSF. And so, you know, for these, a common thing, even with senior people, is that often, you know, they may come up with this great idea. They don't have enough results to really convince people that, yeah, indeed, this new line of, you know, we're not convinced by this new line of direction. We've got to have some proof.
Yeah, in our area, it's you know, absolutely necessary to put some preliminary results. And I have a specific example. When I submitted first time, I proposed to do something. I do hydrology, water, but I said I'm going to do sediment also because that in that area there's nothing done yet. But they quickly found out that I hadn't done anything like that before, and I had no publication listed, no preliminary results, and said the PI doesn't have the capability to do this. So it was extremely important. Second time I removed that component.
Yeah, so I guess just my experience on that, I submitted mine in my first year, but I had worked prior at a research lab, so I had some research that I could draw on that kind of filled in some gaps to show that even though I'm trying to build something new, I've already proven that pieces of it work. So I had a good, extensive amount of prior work to put into those sections.
So what if it's an interdisciplinary, like most career grants will be interdisciplinary, but it's some of it is on a field that you're not an expert in, and you're not allowed to put on collaborators. So let's say, you know, I want to do a genomics part, which I know is important. I have some experience working with genomics, but not the full extent of, like, you know, going through the whole process myself. Can I still put that component in a career proposal and say I'm going to hire a postdoc or somebody who will, like, execute that part? Or do I need to, like, prove through publications or something that I have been through that and I can execute it?
No, it's fine to include something like that. And I think your idea of bringing in a postdoc who's got expertise in that area is terrific. You could also mention that, you know, that there are, whatever training available to you to get up to speed in this area, and this is a great way to tie, there's many different ways you can tie in, but you have to make a convincing case that you will have a way of getting the knowledge to help solve the problem. So that's really, really important.
I've seen people include an advisory board in their proposals. That might be another strategy.
I've never seen that on a career proposal, I'll be honest with you, at least not in the chemistry division.
In SciSce, it's more common in different proposals, but I have seen
in other types of
Yeah, in my case, I had collaborators, but those are unpaid collaborators. They would share some resources that is allowed, and you can get a letter from the collaborator. So sometimes that helps because it was a little bit of some sort of outside my expertise a bit, but I just needed some resources or some data. Then I said, this collaborator is going to help me do that. And I do modeling. I have a person who develops some of the components at the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Colorado. So I asked him to write a letter. He said, I'm going to share the code. I'm going to give him all these things. So probably you could do that kind of stuff if that helps. But of course, we cannot have a paid person, a paid collaborator. And by the way, I have a class to teach at 4:10, so I'm going to leave now. And I'd like to thank Lauren and Shova for this opportunity. Before I leave, I want to say a few things. I think there is, some of us already mentioned starting early is really a good idea. And then having the proposal reviewed by your colleagues or sending over to Lauren Shova, it helps. I did that both times I submitted. And also, first time I had 6 reviews, and all of them, 5 out of 6 said, this is overly ambitious. This PI cannot achieve everything that he's proposing here. I called up the program manager and said, I got very good review. I already had a lot of excellence in the first time. And I said, they say it's excellent, but they also say this is too ambitious. He said, okay, be ambitious to some extent, but then say, you can also tell you're going to achieve this during the 5-year period, or remove something that you cannot achieve. So what I did is, upfront, I said, I'm trying to be ambitious here because this is my career proposal. I'm going to build my career foundation. Then I said, but this project is specifically focused on this, this, this. And I showed the evidence that I have already had enough results to support that, and I'm going to achieve this. So I was trying to strike a balance between being ambitious to some extent so that this looks like a career proposal, not a 3-year regular proposal. And also trying to say that this is highly focused. And I said, I'm building on what I already have on my strengths. I used that strategy, and all of the reviewers liked in the second time. Not sure if it worked for everybody, but that is my experience. Yeah, and we already talked about whether science is important or educational component is important. I think there should be some novelty in science, but then if the educational component is weak, it's not going to be funded. So yeah, with that, I think I'm going to leave, and wish you good luck for those who will be submitting. And thank you again, Lauren and Shova.
Thank you very much, Yadu.
Do they really care about prior funded grants? If you have number of other grants from DOE, USDA, and industry, would this be a negative point or a positive point?
It's a neutral point. Basically the NSF proposals are reviewed as unique. Somebody could have a ton of other money from other sources. They'll be given just as fair a chance as everyone else. What's important is that it's a unique proposal.
This is a longer one. The NSF CAREER Award I'm working on is basic biology and the impact of light on wildlife. However, my findings can easily be translated to human well-being. I have been told I should try to downplay in my broader impact section the human translational aspect, as it sounds too much as NIH. What recommendations can you give on emphasizing or not the fact this research would be beneficial for human well-being? For the outreach broader impact component, how do you show feasibility? Should the outreach program already be there? Do you just need letters from the people who will work with to show they agree on it? Any recommendations?
So in terms of what aspect to focus on, again, talk to the program officer. That's absolutely critical, and they'll help give some give some suggestions on that. In terms of whether or not they've done the broader impact, I think it's always important to show that you are involved in some way from the start of your career in terms of some broader impact. It does not have to be exactly what's proposed, because some people propose completely new, unique things. I'd never done an online course before and even though I had said no courses, I meant like your regular course. Wow, I'm going to add a new feature to my regular course. Doing a 100% online course, I'd never done anything like that before. And so, and I had nothing to prove that I could do it or anything along those lines. And so it really, it can be completely unique. It doesn't have to follow up on having done something before.
Could you please give us an idea how large the scope should be compared with regular proposals? Or as far as both research and educational components are included, is the size of scope not important?
I guess I'll try to put my 2 cents in on that. I think I tried to have a pretty broad scope. When I submitted mine, I tried to have a very sort of fundamental aspect to it that I was building everything off of. I did have specific examples on how that new sort of theoretical construct would help and things that I could build and test because I'm an experimentalist. But I started very broad in scope, going back to the initial papers in my field and saying this is where I start and here's how it ties back to that. And I think one other thing, this is a little bit of a tangent, but one thing that hasn't come up quite yet is part of the reason I did that. One of the things that really helped me when I was writing mine was thinking about not only what I wanted to do for research, but what I thought the reviewers would want to see, because these review panels are made up of full professors, I think, at least in my field. I don't know if it is across all of NSF.
It's all areas,
all
fields, not just professors, sometimes people from industry,
okay.
Sometimes associate professors.
So they're usually they're very experienced in the field. And so, in engineering, we always want to come up with something disruptive and say that this is new. And one thing that was important for me to think about is people reviewing it have spent their careers building these things. So you don't want to come in and kind of, flip things upside down. So for me, it made sense because of the topic, but I was really building upon many, many years of research. And so that, I think, sends a bit of a message, that you're developing something new, but also building upon things that are already existing. That's something I kind of kept in mind as I was writing it. And so from that sense, I had sort of a very broad sort of base to it when I wrote it. And again, specific examples that I focused on.
Is having a senior scholar as a consultant an advantage or a disadvantage?
It depends. If it looks like that it's really kind of in their field and you're going to be kind of moving into their field, I would say it's not an advantage. If it's someone like the example earlier where it's someone who is in a completely different area than you and you just need them to consult with an aspect that you're trying to build in, but you're not an expert in, something like that might be okay. But I would really tread that one pretty carefully.
Hi, thanks. Are there any expectations about adding in or including funds for graduate students, PhD students, say, for the duration of the grant, or confused about how to weight the ratio between resources for the science and resources for people who would be mentored through the project?
To provide me with some context, what's your field?
I'm in archaeology.
Okay. And so I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask a couple questions.
Sure.
What do you mean in terms of the science? What types of funding would you need? What are you trying to? Yeah.
So funds for field and laboratory work.
Okay.
Versus resources for funding fellowships and stipends and
okay.
all of that.
Okay.
For I guess for both PhD students and postdocs.
Right. So I mean, in terms of waiting or between PhD students and postdocs, the costs really are not that far off either direction. You know, so I would get what you need. I mean, honestly, from my own experience when I was starting out, I would say graduate students are often more helpful in the fact that you can have them for 5 years, you know, 4 or 5 years, depending upon the field, sometimes longer. And postdocs are sometimes shorter term. And sometimes when you're an assistant professor, sometimes you can't get as strong postdocs sometimes as you can as you get more senior in your career. And so I would pick whatever, you know, whatever's most useful to you. If you've got other resources that would cover students to work on the project, then great. But my advice is usually to, you know, NSF wants to see that, you know, who's going to be working on it and how do we guarantee someone's going to be working on it? So I would at least have some personnel in there. But certainly, you know, people in your field understand that, you know, the other aspects are expensive. And so, you know, this is a question you might want to ask your program officer in terms of kind of what kind of balance do they usually look for in these, and they'll provide some useful insight. And, you know, you may want to look at some other career proposals, and they might give you some insight as well. The other thing I want to mention is that all of you can contact a program officer and say, hey, can you get me on the list? I'd really like to be on a panel. And sometimes they will ask, at least some fields will ask people who are assistant professors occasionally to be on a career panel. Because if you're not submitting one, you know, at least chemistry would always try to include at least a couple people on a career panel so they can kind of see what might be coming their way. So
I have an interesting story about personnel. And so for my division, I always thought that the NSF was really focused on training. And so graduate student training was like valued somehow over postdoctoral or undergraduate training and graduate training. And then I had a conversation with my program officer, and she said that there was some concern that universities were taking a lot of overhead for tuition and fringe for the graduate students. And so she encouraged me to justify very clearly why I wanted to train a student on my proposal instead of just paying a technician, which would have essentially the same kind of overhead. I don't know if this was a one-off for my division, but I was really surprised about that. And so I think the NSF is maybe sometimes concerned about universities charging more for tuition and cutting into project budgets in that way. And so, I would talk with the program officer.
I'm going to comment on that. Keep in mind that the NSF has got a lot of rotators. About 1/3 of the workforce are rotators. And so occasionally you may get a newer program officer that may answer a question along those lines. Honestly, as NSF as a whole, we very much value the education component, the training of postdocs and graduate students. And, you know, typically we're not going to question, why don't you just have a technician? It depends upon the area, but in general, that's not a question in turn. And, you know, I've never heard any NSF ever question the overhead at the university. I mean, that is something that is federally negotiated with every university, and we know that it's just a part of the process. And so that is not something that is questioned at NSF.
All right, thank you. In conclusion, could you please provide the audience with some final tips and advice for them to think about as they go and prepare their career proposals?
You can start early. I can't stress that enough. Get as much feedback as possible. I don't know how many times you can say that. And when I say start, don't have like an outline, have a full draft done a good 3 or 4 months before the deadline to get feedback on.
Yeah, I guess I would just emphasize, you know, at least in engineering, you don't want to propose, you know, building a thing like a widget. You really want to propose something you can build your career off of. So for me, that's like a concept or an idea, and you might build a couple of individual things along the way or demonstrate a couple of things, but the underlying concept is what you're proposing. It's what's called the career proposal, you know, so that's something to keep in mind.
I would say to not underestimate, this goes with starting early, but not underestimate the amount of work that needs to be done after you're done writing the proposal. You want your readers to enjoy reading it. You want the spacing to look nice. You want the figures to look professional, and you want to, if there's time, to be able to reach out to the office and to resources like Lauren and ask, do you have time to read this for me, and make sure that I'm not too verbose and that I'm saying things in the most concise way, and tell me if it's not clear from an outsider's perspective. That takes like 2 to 3 months turnaround. If you want a professional writer to look at your grant, you need to give them time, and you need to have time to respond to the critiques that they give you afterwards. And so, you know, this can take a proposal, like even a very well written proposal that's written in disgusting font and like it's too small and you like have it all justified the whole way, right? You know, you want when your reviewers are reading that proposal to really enjoy the aesthetics of it and to like not feel like it's a chore, even if they're reading on an airplane or before bed or while their kid is screaming, whatever. So pay attention to the finesse that it takes at the end and appreciate the amount of time that it takes to give it all for your finessing.
I can't emphasize enough how important that last comment was. I've had reviewers see proposals that are just, you know, I've had people want to fit every single possible word they can into a proposal. And I've seen these proposals that really agitate, even though it's legal space for NSF, they get really agitated, and nothing is worse than an agitated reviewer. And so that is such an important comment. One thing I want to mention is that, you know, while I hope that every one of you gets every one of your proposals funded, I can tell you that I have never seen anyone at NSF ever get every single proposal funded, and that includes Nobel laureates. And so I've seen many Nobel laureates get proposals declined. So learn from that experience, have the normal reaction that you're not happy at the time, go out and do whatever relaxes you. Resist the temptation to call the program officer and be angry about it. They do get it, and the division directors do sometimes get involved. You don't want the division director involved in such a phone call, okay? I would suggest that you then calm down and do not contact the program officer for about 2 weeks. Go back and look at the proposal, and then have a feel-good moment, looking at all the great things, because I've seen people look and say, look, I don't understand why they didn't fund me, because look at all these great things that the reviewers said, okay? Look at those great things, relish them, and then cross them out, okay? Then look at the rest of this and have a drink or whatever is gonna keep you calm during the process. Take a look then at what the things that it says to work on. Think about it, calm down again, then email the program officer and ask them if you could have a conversation with them. Do have a conversation with the program officer, because the program officer has also been at the panel discussion, because the career proposals are discussed in panel. And they will have additional insight that is not written down in terms of your reviews. Okay, wait till you get your reviews and all that, and, you know, for this. And then once you have this conversation, when you have the conversation with them and just say, I see the comments, I can see some of the criticisms, and I know how to address some of these. But there's some of these I'm a little more puzzled on. And can you help me see kind of what I need to do about this? And don't try to convince them otherwise, because I can tell you, you're not going to win that battle. Okay, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But then have to ask them, well, are there some other things that I can do to try to make this better for next time? I'd really appreciate your suggestions. Be wonderful to them, because odds are they might be your program officer next time and for other proposals you submit as well. Especially if it's a permanent staff member. You may be working with them for 10 or 20 years. And then also, you know, the only way NSF, you can do a debate with NSF in terms of, oh, I don't agree with the way this was reviewed, if there's something wrong with the process. And so it doesn't mean that one reviewer was totally inappropriate or something like that. It's actually, did the NSF do something wrong in terms of the process? My entire time at NSF, I've never seen anything go wrong in terms of the process. They've got quite an amazing process. And so don't even try, honestly, you know, consult with these folks here at MSU if you think there's something going on with the process before you contact your program officer. But indeed, know that everyone gets rejected and learn from that. And use that opportunity to develop the best possible relationship you can with your program officer, because they will appreciate you so much being a new investigator and calling them and saying, hey, what's your advice? I really appreciate it. And having a calm, logical discussion with them, not trying to argue with them, just trying to learn from them. You will develop an amazing relationship with your program officer from that point forward. They'll include you on panels, your proposals. They will have more positive thoughts when they see your proposal and your name come across their desk, rather than, oh God, here they come again. I don't really want to deal with this person, because I guarantee you there are some people like that we encounter, people have encountered at NSF.
Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking our panelists.